Welcome to episode 2 of Gregarious Chant. Today, my conversation is with Dr. John Peterson. He is a professor of humanities and manager of interdisciplinary graduate programs at the University of Dallas. I've known John for a few years now. We ran in similar circles back when I lived in Texas. And I wanted to bring him on the show today to discuss a philosopher I've only ever heard of but never really read or did much study in, and that philosopher was Leo Strauss, or is Leo Strauss. He's got a kind of a big influence, or has had a big influence, on conservatism, and I didn't know much about him. He gets a little bit of a bad rap, and having talked with Dr. Peterson, I find that maybe that bad rap isn't deserved, or maybe it is. That can be up for you to decide. But we have a great conversation about conservatism today, about what we can take from Leo Strauss, and just kind of where he sits in terms of where his philosophy kind of sits in terms of modern philosophy and how conservatives can use it or can't use it. So anyways, it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. If you liked the conversation, please like this video, subscribe below, leave comments, all that stuff. It helps with the algorithm. It helps with getting people to watch our channel, all that jazz. Anyways, let's get on with the conversation. Thank you for being here and enjoy. Old cartoons used to be slapstick.
Yeah,
people interacting with the world.
You're struggling with the world. You're getting hit in the face with things.
Right.
It's funny because we identify with that struggle. Whereas like kids shows today are that struggle is just covered over, right? So this Mickey Mouse Clubhouse show, this article in the New Atlantis was saying, you have this sort of like magic machine that presents these sort of like these options, which are the options which are going to be the struggles that they encounter, and it just like sort of magically fixes the problem each time it arises.
Right.
So one example is like they're looking for something, but then there's this big like gorge or river in their way, and they just like open up the machine, and it's like push the bridge button, which is like magically an option that week, and then the bridge appears and they cross it.
Okay.
Like that's there's an app for that essentially.
What a great hero's journey of like, what am I supposed to, the despair, then you meet the mentor who just says go to the app, and you go to the app, and then it's just great. What perfect. Is that Joseph Conrad with the whole thing? Yeah. Nailed
right.
it.
And that's what young people today want. They want all the rough things to be smoothed over for them. Like there's just the expectation that if there's a difficulty, it's somebody else's problem to deal with, and that they are going to voice and express their frustration, and something's going to emerge to take care of it.
Interesting. Huh. And you think that's part of the reason why like going into the woods is a good thing, and kind of disconnecting from technology is a good thing, and it's not just luditry, because it's not. Like, to me, luditry is reactionary. Like, technology has caused a lot of issues that make us unhappy, so we smash the clocks, we break the machinery.
Right.
It's very just like this bad we break versus
right. Well, it's not
intentionally going out into nature and doing something.
Yeah, it's not luditry if you say like, oh, I need to spend time having dinner with my family, so I'm going to put my phone down for 2 hours. Like that's not right. So going into a wilderness retreat for 3 weeks, which is what we were talking about before you started recording, which is what Wyoming Catholic College does for its freshmen, is not luditry, right? It's saying
it's purposeful. It's not reactionary.
Yeah, I mean, it is some degree of reaction, because it's a kind of curative, it's a kind of purge.
Yeah.
Right. Or if you've overindulged in something, you might need to go overreact in the other direction.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I've just been wondering, because I've seen a lot of people reacting. To me, it feels a lot of it very reactionary, although it's good in that it's Facebook is evil, so I'm getting a flip phone. And it's like, I get it. It's bad. I got rid of my Facebook.
Me too.
Right. But it's not, are you actually, and this is my problem with conservatism in general, is it's often the reflection or the shadow of what it actually is, right? Like conservatism, I would say, often defines itself by what it is not, which is
Yeah.
liberalism.
Right.
And that seems to be what a lot of people do when they get rid of Facebook. It's like, well, why'd you get the flip phone? Because I hate Facebook. Sure, but it's like, give me the positive reason. Give me the real, like, give me the why is it good in and of itself, like not in and of itself, but give me the positive reason.
Yeah, I agree with that. Conservatism should be a vigorous embrace of life.
Sure.
That's affirmative.
Are you saying that we shouldn't stand athwart history yelling stop? Is that
Yeah, no.
right?
No.
I hate that metaphor because that means that conservatism is the brakes of the car. If history is a car, which is
Right.
debatable, progressivism is the accelerator. That means conservatism is the brakes. That never means it can go in
what's
reverse.
implicit? Yeah, I mean, as you're suggesting, what's implicit in that image of standing athwart history is that history is a force,
right?
That has a momentum to it,
A
which
current
is
yeah,
right, which is itself an argument that
yes,
is debatable.
it cedes a lot of ground just in the metaphor itself by saying it goes. But to me, it's like, okay, say it does go. If you're yelling stop, at no point will it go in the direction you want it to go. You can only slow it down.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it's defeatist on two levels. One, it accepts a premise that I don't necessarily buy, that history is a car or is this kind of force that's moving. And two, you've decided you don't want to take control of it. You just want to slow it down.
Yeah, well, a lot of the neoconservative types and the traditionalist types who formed the alliance, I guess, or the coalition behind modern conservatism, which is something that predates National Review and Buckley, but
not
just,
by much, right? By like
not by
years.
much. It's largely coeval with it.
Yeah.
They share an implicitly historicist stance, which is this kind of Burkean notion that traditions and institutions of value have been have coalesced over time, and because they have lasted, they are they're worth our veneration.
Sure.
Which is, I think, not wrong for as far as it goes, right? Like today we would call this like the Lindy principle.
Right. It's Lindy. I would say it sounds
it's still around. It's worth, yeah.
Right.
But it's implicitly historicist. Like it's not an account from nature of what is excellent.
Correct. It's not. There's no it's not grounded in absolute truth. It's grounded in, well, this works. This has been around. Let's not just throw it out. It's actually very Chestertonian, the Chesterton's fence parable, which is a shame because I love Chesterton, but I do think there is
there's a value to it, but it's I mean, as a sort of prudential rule of thumb,
right?
Absolutely, that's what you should go with. But it's limited insofar as it implicitly rejects a natural standard of judgment, which would tell you we seek not the traditional but the good, as Aristotle says.
Right. And it like eventually devolves into just subjectiveness, right? So, and what's the word I'm looking for? It's not rational. I'm bad at thinking of words. This happened last time too. What is it when nothing matters? It's not nihilism, but it's close to nihilism.
Nothing matters.
Yeah.
We believe in nothing, Lebowski. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, they were German nihilists. But right?
They were threatening castration.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's great. I love a good Big Lebowski reference.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is actually a decent enough segue to get into what I want to talk about today.
Okay.
Which is Leo Strauss.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about Leo Strauss. I know that he's out there. I know he's a big school of thought among conservative academics. I know that he's influenced a lot of neocons, from what I've heard, kind of secondhand. But he himself, I've never read him. I don't know what his main teachings are. in prepping for this, I read his Wikipedia page, which is, I'm gonna call it a mess. It's not very good. There are parts of it where I was just like, I was reading, I was like, man, am I a Straussian? I love some of the stuff he says. And then there are other parts where it's like, is this obscure on purpose? What's going on here? So
It's funny. I don't think I've ever read the Strauss Wikipedia page. So, I mean, I can only imagine what horrors lie within. But
yeah, I'd check it out. It seems like it's been like half cleansed by the internet. So you know how like, it's kind of doing this whole revisionist thing. It seems like people have screwed with it. Anyways, I'm hoping you can kind of set things straight with me and help me understand Leo Strauss. His
trained
impact.
in the neo-Kantian tradition. Okay. I'm already cringing here.
Are you triggered? You're triggered right now?
I mean, I don't really know what they mean by neo-Kantian tradition, and they mention Ernst Cassirer. I don't even. I mean, I vaguely even know who that is, and but that doesn't seem right to me. But so yeah, what do you want to ask about specifically?
So I guess the thesis of the talk is going to be the neocons love Strauss. So help me understand why I should hate him.
Well, a lot of people love Strauss more than just neocons, but I mean, let me get into that. So
yeah,
what is a neocon? A neocon is a liberal who is has a kind of intellectual take which leads him or her to embrace conservative positions for the sake of So their tendency is going to be liberal. And what is a liberal? A liberal is somebody.
Can you clarify liberal? Do you mean classical liberal, like Enlightenment liberal, or Hillary Clinton liberal?
I mean, I think there's a connection between those. I mean, but I think we can go too far in the direction of saying like classical liberalism is the opposite of modern liberalism. Like, no, there's an implicit connection in
there's a lineage there.
Yeah, well, and in the embrace of individualism.
Correct.
Right. That's if there's one thing which defines liberalism, it's that government is for the sake of protecting individual rights.
Right.
And so the individual has a kind of has a veto sort of over the group or the tradition or the institution.
Right.
So the neocons are all liberals in that sense. But then this question of, okay, so what policy do you embrace following upon that? Right? And that's where you're going to have disagreement, and where liberals could embrace, what they think a Straussian conclusion would be with regard to like foreign policy.
Right. Well, that's generally what I would say.
Right. That's how they're associated with, and the Iraq War. Which think about what that is. It's thinking that individualism and the forces of liberalism can supplant what you perceive to be disastrous or harmful traditions or institutions in other places in the world.
Right.
But this is,
I would argue that neocons have an almost evangelical nature to their kind of love of liberalism, love of, to me, it seems like they export the Declaration of Independence everywhere they go. Right.
But I mean, maybe.
Because I mean,
I don't know. I feel like for them it's more calculated. I think it's more like the U.S. needs to wield power in the world, and so how is it going to do this? Is it going to do this through a kind of realpolitik, where you say, let me just think about interests and just put aside ideology? In that way, 20th century foreign policy is it's starting with like people like George Kennan, and they're a reaction to the kind of ideological liberalism of somebody like, say, Wilson. But then the neocons are a kind of further step where they implicitly, the way they really think, they really have realist premises, like so-called realist. I would say so-called realist because real realism would be realizing that people care about what they believe and will do things that are somewhat irrational because of them. But so taking those realist premises, which say people just are motivated by, interest and balance of power, and you need to put aside ideology. They go another step where they say, yeah, but people do care about ideology in service of their interests. So if you can find an ideology that will be useful for promoting the interests that we want, like that's what we should do. And so, I mean, that's a very simplistic, rough way of putting it. But like the neocons, like people like, I mean, we're thinking about people like Bill Kristol, who's not, I mean, Irving Kristol is the original
father, yeah.
Who they're not, like we're seeing now from Bill Kristol, like there's not in any way a conservative,
no.
but he just favors policy, which, you know, other parts of the liberal establishment would disagree with. Mm-hmm. But because he's more cynical, right? Like that's the real difference here. It's just a kind of cynicism versus like idealism. Yeah. But then, so Bill Kristol has like some tangential relationship to Straussianism. Like he was a student to some degree of Harvey Mansfield, who's like the chief Straussian, who at Harvard, who is somewhat of an independent development. He's not really a direct student of Strauss so much as a scholar of Strauss.
Okay. But
then you have people like who are students of Alan Bloom. So Alan Bloom was like the most famous of Strauss's students at Chicago. Okay. He's famous for writing The Closing of the American Mind, which is a sort of popular, just a very popular book. And he was a very gregarious person and cultivated all these connections. And he taught at Cornell and other places. And in those places, like he had a lot of students who were not going to go on to be, you know, great scholars. I mean, they were very intelligent, but they went on and they went into government.
Sure. Policy, all that stuff.
Yeah. And some of them, like, for instance, like Paul Wolfowitz is the one everyone always mentions. And I think I don't remember who made this line, but it's like people hate Paul Wolfowitz because his name starts menacingly and ends Jewishly. I remember who said that, but it seems right to me. But he was a student of Bloom at Cornell, I think. And then he went on to like the Office of like Special Plans or something, you know, where like basically that's where they cooked up all of this, you know, kind of, you know, like that's where you get the kind of like Straussian neocon connection where, you know, Iraq war mongering. I mean, this is really like circa 15 years ago, but
early 2000s, that kind of stuff.
But I would say that's a very limited like offshoot of like what Strauss is about.
So you're saying,
and then just in terms of like the political connections, like in terms of like present political movements, like the other side of the coin is what is called West Coast Straussian, which is the students of Harry Jaffa in California.
I was going to say Jaffa's the big one. Is that Claremont he's out of or was out of?
Yeah, in Claremont. Yeah. Which is connected to obviously there's the Claremont Institute and
and then my boy Larry Arnn, I believe, was a student of Jaffa. So you got the Hillsdale.
He's a Claremont fellow or whatever they call it. Yeah.
Interesting. So it seems like my premise that the neocons love Strauss is purely pragmatic, and that they've found a thinker who potentially has some thoughts they agree with, and they've used him to justify their beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's no necessary political conclusions from the teaching of Strauss. I mean,
interesting. So who are some of the other people?
He's beyond liberalism. He's beyond conservatism. Like,
see, I like that. I want to get beyond.
He's liberalism. Like, it's not. I mean, so you have these derivations where you have the question of like, okay, what is the American regime and what should it be now? Like, these are prudential questions. Like philosophy. Like Strauss is all about the recovery of ancient philosophy and of the perennial political questions. He's not about these political conclusions will follow. That's a matter of prudence, right? How you are able to take particular circumstances and align them with principles. The thing, though, about Straussianism and how it relates to politics is that, you know, the sly thing, the thing that is suspicious, right, when people, you know, hear about it, is that the question of principle itself becomes contingent on regime, right? So so the Straussian thinks, here's like the cartoonish way to put it.
Sure. Give me the
Which
cartoon.
isn't necessarily the wrong way to put it at all. But the Straussian thinks like each regime is contingent. Like it's a kind of enveloping atmosphere of opinion that is not simply truth. And
Right.
so it's going to have assumptions and beliefs which the enlightened philosopher, can see beyond. So I recognize that there are sort of like useful lies that everyone believes,
Right.
and I will use these cynically or not as I see fit. So the question is like, what is the character of the American regime, and what are its sort of enveloping atmosphere and opinions like? Is it a simply modern regime that has a kind of low but stable basis in natural rights-based social contract theory of Hobbes and Locke?
Sure.
Or is it and thus like has a kind of implicit egalitarianism, and doesn't promote high noble things, and so is somewhat leads to a sort of petty and small souls and consumerism and all of that? Or does it like retain some elements of like the ancient or the classical understanding of virtue and of statesmanship, and of the responsibility of the noble, of the people, of to pursue the noble? So the difference between the East and the West is more is on the disagreement on that question. The West Coast believes that there's more of a continuity with the entire tradition, and that there are elements of sort of classical statesmanship and classical virtue and republicanism preserved in the American regime, whereas the East Coasters more consider, the American sort of not, it's more of a sort of haphazard consequence of happy circumstances and modern political, modern philosophy. And so it's not very enlightened and doesn't have much continuity with the ancient, which is higher and no more noble.
Right.
But the funny thing is, like, the neoconservatives who went abroad searching for monsters, and they're more of the East Coast school. Right. So their use of like liberalism and individualism as a kind of, weapon is entirely cynical.
Right. Well, I would argue that's kind of this is a bit off topic, but I would say that's one of the like defining things about liberalism in the broad sense, is that it tends to like pick up ideologies that it finds useful for it to aggregate power. And in the neocon side, you see it kind of doing that with tradition, with conservative values, right? All the taglines we've grown to hate. And then on the kind of left side of it, liberal side of things, you see them do that with like critical race theory and all this other kind of stuff, right? It's very much to be cynical about the cynics, it's very much a power grab, right? Like it seems like that's what the defining characteristic of that kind of liberal side of things.
Yeah, although let me qualify that a bit in terms of just the neoconservatives. It's not just a cynical using of ideology. Like they really believe that the way of life afforded by liberalism will smooth over the rough places. And that, I mean, it's a kind of Montesquieuian notion of the softness of commerce. Like commerce destroys hard mores and makes us soft, which is what you want. So in like China, for instance,
well, let's say that seems like the big example that we exported capitalism to China or whatever,
and it's supposed to make them
that didn't happen. Really,
it did not happen, not at all.
No.
They're just like, oh yeah, sure. Like we'll use all of this research in technology and consumerism, and like we'll create an army of like,
we will absolutely enrich ourselves in the process, and then control our population even more thoroughly.
So, but that was that's the same thing as in Iraq and the Middle East. It's the notion that if you introduce Western style capitalism and commercialism there, it will solve the problems of peace.
That's
Whereas the more like sort of hardcore realpolitik would be somebody more like, Trump, who was just like, yeah, we'll support a strongman dictator. Like that's better than like
right.
what like stability there is good
Right.
for us. So whatever will lead to stability. And like, but the problem with that is you have to believe that these peoples are all ready for and clamoring for this, and not that like, just like centuries of traditions and tribalism are just going to persist. And so it's really a failure to like, they're not thinking like they think that they're really cynical, but they're not thinking cynically enough, which is just that like there are just like differences between peoples that go back very far. Like
that's why I say it feels almost evangelical. It's like, here, have the free market. It'll save you, right? It'll save you from your terrible oppressive traditions that hate women and all the other liberal values we currently have, right? And I think that also shows like what I would call like the neocon Beltway Libertarian Alliance that you see, right? They want to ship out capitalism because apparently it's good, right? It makes things better, and libertarians being one-trick ponies, being that they love capitalism, would naturally glom onto that. Or at least unsophisticated libertarians would.
Yeah, and so it is not like the fact that like students of Strauss, or end up espousing the same view as like an idiot like Tom Friedman, like should really like that should really be alarming. And I think so I think it does. I would say like this is a very narrow subset of like students of Strauss or students of students.
But it seems like they have their outside power, right? Like they seem extra influential.
But I do want to say though that it does have some origin in what Straussianism is.
Okay.
Insofar as
well, actually, let's get into that kind of broader. Like we've kind of laid out where it sits now. Let's go back to like what Strauss himself said. Like what philosophical tradition does he belong to? I think.
Well, just even the fact that he belongs to a philosophical tradition is enough, because philosophy, as opposed to something else like history, is going to take seriously ideas and arguments more than simply history.
So when you say history, do you mean like Hegelianism, historicism?
No, well, not really. I just mean like actually knowing about events and particulars in other countries and other times, and then relating them to your own time and your own history. Like precisely because the study of philosophy, and I mean the study of like real philosophy, not like analytic like philosophy, like which is what most philosophy departments do. I mean like philosophy in terms of the study of the perennial human questions.
So you're talking about like Greek ancient philosophy through maybe scholasticism?
No, through the present, like through modernity. I mean, there are serious people doing, insofar as you're asking these sort of perennial questions about the good and the human good, and even I'll even allow metaphysical questions.
Sure.
But that's the Socratic tradition in philosophy.
Right.
Is asking up these fundamental human questions, these perennial questions. Like insofar as though you're concerned about that, like you think like the same. Like it's an opposition to relativism and historicism. Like you think the same things are going to be true forever, and you're looking into those questions, and so you're going to look askance at historical questions where you're going to try to qualify some argument by some account of history, or you'll say like, well, Rousseau was a romantic, or like whatever. Like you just put somebody in some box, and then you've ascribed certain qualities to that box, and so then you say, I'm going to ascribe these things to the people that I've put in the box. Like that's what so much of like education and argumentation is. It's like it's completely it's arbitrary and historicist, and that's what some of these doing real philosophy or in the Socratic tradition is going to resist. But that means that so often they are going to take history for granted, and they'll be ignorant of history, and so they won't really recognize what are the differences. And so insofar as somebody says like, well, like Arabs are like this, and the people from like the Anglo tradition are like this, like first of all they'll be like, that's racist.
Yes.
But second of all, they'll be like, well, that but aren't they perennial? Like, aren't you concerned with the perennial human questions?
Right.
Yeah,
You've
but
now
like in
crossed
doing
into
that, you can,
relativism and historicism, right? What I like,
right. It goes too far, and I wouldn't say it's like somebody like Strauss is guilty of this, although when he's studying, he doesn't write much on, like, for instance, like somebody like Cicero, who was very much concerned with his regime, and then with history.
Okay.
So, and he would be interested in, insofar as he is a philosopher, not so much as somebody who like looked at the particular problems and needs of his own regime and his own time, and addressed those in like a real and like manly, vigorous way, like in the forum, like took up the questions and actually address them like as if they mattered for his own life. Like the Straussian today is just like, oh well, if things go bad here, I'll go to Switzerland. It's like so
that's interesting.
That's not what I mean. Like, fine, maybe you're saying like that's beneath you, but also that kind of attitude leads you to neglect the problems of your own time and not really be able to recognize them for what they are. So that's how you get something like neoconservatism or neoconservative Straussians.
Right, because it seems like they've almost removed themselves from the current period. Like you've abstracted yourself out of it, or you've elevated yourself up to this kind of like video game level, right? Like you're playing The Sims and you have a theory on how to play The Sims instead of just living life, to use a reference from my 13-year-old days playing The Sims and lighting people on fire. So, okay, that's interesting. So you would say he does have a philosophical tradition. Does that mean would you place him as part of the Enlightenment? I'm personally going through a rebellion against the Enlightenment in my philosophical views. My background is like economics, libertarianism, very Enlightenment heavy, very liberal philosophy, and I've come to just not despise it, but see the cracks. And I'm looking for an alternative. Is Strauss my alternative
to the Enlightenment? Well, yeah, sure.
How so?
So he's not an Enlightenment thinker. I mean,
sure.
So, I mean, Strauss
he's after it, but like, is he?
So the number one,
yeah.
I mean, if you were to like just like define what like the Straussian tradition, Straussianism is, like the number one thing would be the differences between the ancients and the moderns. Okay. That is to say, we need to recognize what those are, right? And so, like, what is modernity?
Sure.
Well, why do we need to ask those questions? Like, well, because it seems to be in a kind of crisis about like its own goodness.
Sure.
And it has confidence in itself.
Thing that has nothing to say about its own goodness, I would argue.
Right, but so we have to ask, like, well, what's the break? Like, why did they separate decisively from the ancients? And so, in order to understand that separation, we have to go back to the ancients. Right. So, if you're looking for a cure of the problems of Enlightenment liberalism, like that, yes, like reading somebody like Strauss, following his direction in terms of how to read the old books, is key, right? And part of his argument is like people read these books extremely poorly.
Yes.
Now because they apply their own
we've adopted
their own judgments of history.
Yeah. We also adopted all their terms and changed all the meanings, right? Like
so Strauss comes from this I guess you could say this tradition of so he's a student of Heidegger.
Okay.
To some degree, who is a student of Husserl, and Husserl,
a phenomenologist. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, part of his point though is that like we're in this position in late history where the ideas as we encounter them are set. This is not my expertise, so I might sound like an idiot, but they're sedimented. There's a sedimentation to them. They've acquired all of this meaning that and all of this categorization and classification and the original freshness of the thinking and of the idea behind it is lost.
Right.
So we're in this sort of like late stage. So what we need to do is desedimentize and go back,
right,
and recover the original meaning and the original thinking.
Right.
And so we need to go back and read the ancients. So Strauss is somebody who does this seriously. Now, Husserl and Heidegger they do this in terms of like, sort of pure philosophy.
I was about to say, yeah, they're not political philosophers.
Not in terms of political philosophy.
Right.
Where Strauss's real innovation is not innovation, but his real insight is to see that what is fundamental to the the Greek Revolution in thought is realizing that the perennial questions like what is justice and what is the noble, that these are more fundamental. I mean, this is like Strauss doesn't say this ever explicitly, but like more fundamental in a way than these questions about being and these metaphysical questions, which is a recovery of the Socratic,
right? Or at least it's
approach.
Yeah.
So Socrates is, the Socratic revolution, right, in philosophy.
Yeah.
Also called Socrates' second sailing, is to sort of bring the question down to earth and say, you can't answer these questions about what is mind and, what is the purpose of the world and all of this, unless you're able to ask these human questions, understand these human questions.
Right.
And in fact, our beliefs themselves in some way originate out of or are a reflection of our thinking about the human good.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to examine opinion about the human good, because opinions are in some way reflections of knowledge, about true knowledge about things.
Right. Well, that's like teleology essentially, right?
Sure. Yeah.
That's close. Yeah. It's interesting that I didn't realize he came from a phenomenological tradition, right? I didn't. That's cool, because to me, when I think of phenomenology, I think of people attempting to fight back against the relativism of modernity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, I wouldn't say they're overly successful, but they make an attempt and they get closer. So that may be why I was like, when I was reading the wiki, I was like, all right, I kind of dig what this guy's saying,
So yeah, I mean, Strauss is speaking against relativism, historicism, and positivism. Mm-hmm. So logical and scientific positivism, which is essentially the fact value distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Which
can you go into that further? Because I would like, I'm familiar with it from a libertarian standpoint, in that Ludwig von Mises talks about historicism and how positivism is bad because it, I would say, from what I recall, it does add a moral element to it, right? Or almost a practical aspect to it, where what's the opposite of non-positive? It's not negativism, is it? I just thought of it as like positivism and like neutralism, where it's more facts, it's more this is. Can you kind of dig in a bit deeper or clarify if I'm wrong? It's been about 10 years since I've read it, so.
Yeah, maybe you don't understand positivism the same way I do. I might be
understand
wrong.
Well, I understand from an economic standpoint, so it might be different from kind of your view.
Well, essentially, it's the idea that there's no translation between. I mean, this comes like from Hume, like the is-ought distinction. Like you can't go from ises to an ought. Mm-hmm. You can't make the conclusion from one to the other that like such and such is true, such and such is true. Like, and so what is an ought? It's a kind of imposition of one's will, or it's a kind of just desire. And so we can just say like, well, I can measure all the desires, and then, but nothing. I can't tell you one thing is definitively good or better.
Right.
That kind of thing is not subject to a truth claim.
Right.
So
I guess when I say moralizing, that's what I think of as it's more moralizing is probably the wrong way to say it, but to me, it's what you want. It's the desired kind of, it's more, it's not in that like 2 + 2 = 4. It's more opinion, I would argue.
So, but here's the irony is that people who think, well, I'm purely all about just like logic and like what is can be measured and what is true, and I'm a
Yeah.
scientist and I'm objective,
Well,
and,
okay.
and I don't and I
Yeah.
don't make
I know
and
where
I
you're going
don't
with this.
and I don't make like value claims into truth claims. Like those people are like the 100% like the most pure conventionalists
Yeah.
because they worship power essentially because
Right.
that's what
Follow
you
the
have to do.
science. Okay. You have to
Right.
follow the. We believe in science here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's what you have to do because you don't believe that really
Right.
there's any like there's a possibility of investigating and knowing the truth
Right.
in anything having to do with morality.
Right.
There was a good New York Times op-ed or something called "Why Our Children Don't Believe in Moral Facts"
Mm.
a while back, which was talking about how this distinction, it's in terms of a fact versus an opinion, right, is taught like in elementary schools, like this basic rubric of how you should see reality.
Right.
And they're saying that they're giving like a third grader a worksheet that's like, you know, cheating on your homework is wrong. And it's like, well, if it uses the word wrong or right, it's an opinion and not a fact. And
Right.
so you check the opinion thing like
Right.
on your homework for
Yeah.
cheating on your homework. It's like, yeah, no wonder we're in deep trouble. Like,
Yeah.
we're teaching people that you can't objectively know that
Right.
something is right or wrong, which is insane. And this runs in the face of the tradition.
No, but like
yeah.
you just said, we killed God. Like, of course, this is what's going to happen, right? Like that seems to be the logical outcome. Is that there is no longer
Mhm.
that there's no longer that kind of pillar to anchor ourselves by.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the divide goes, or the killing of God in that sense, goes much, it goes back very far to
Yeah, it predates Nietzsche, but he's
Bacon and Nietzsche and Descartes.
Descartes is the irony being that he was a God-fearing man, right? I mean, Descartes
Mhm.
was a devout Catholic. He tried his best, but I think he ends up starting the tradition that kills God.
Yeah, sure. I mean, lots of people who are believing Christians and Catholics and I think hold views that are, on the surface, like, pious and
Sure.
and good, but like their opinions, like when examined, like would lead to just a kind of pure assertion of will, which would be indefensible.
Right.
Right. I mean, you see this like William of Ockham, for instance. I mean,
Yes.
That's so anyway, I think maybe we've gotten off track, and I don't think I answered your question fully, but
That's okay. I don't remember the question. I enjoy going off track. These are good things to talk about because I think they're still relevant today and still, like I would say, all of our problems are more than this. And I'd also throw out that it's not even liberal versus or like Republican versus Democrat, because what's like Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings. Like that to me is also like, sure, but it's close. It's close to that whole like, we can't have opinions on morality. It's not quite there, but it rings of it. So it's not.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of like it's on both sides. There is no clear in this current kind of conservative muddying of the waters we're in, or conservative civil war that we're in right now. There are people on the conservative side who are wrong or who have worse ideas.
Oh yeah, oh for sure.
Yeah.
I always wondered, like the facts don't care about your feelings thing. I mean, I don't know that much about Ben Shapiro. Obviously, I've heard that line. Like everyone's heard that line.
It's a pain. I hate the line. My response is
I've never
feelings
really
have
tried to
never
like
cared about
parse it out.
facts. Yeah.
I've never really tried to parse it out, but it's like it just seems to me as like a deeply unserious representative of a deeply unserious take on the world. Which
Yeah.
I don't know that Ben Shapiro is unserious. I think he probably is
Yeah, he
a
strikes me
serious
as
person in many
yeah.
ways. But it's just because it's like, what is a fact? Like that's
Right.
that's
Another great
the
question.
that's the problem is that
Also, what's a feeling? If you want to get like, are we talking
yeah.
like intuition? Or are we talking about like I'm crying because it's I don't know. And it's like let's be clear, it's a marketing slogan. Let's not give it too much weight. I doubt it's like I don't think it's the thesis he runs his life by. I hope not, anyways. But it is interesting that that's the marketing slogan he went with, because it does. To me, it feels very much like in this house we believe in science, right? We don't care what we don't care
It's
about
like
your
the
feelings.
right-wing
We
version
believe in
of that.
science. Yeah. So it,
Well, it's also like an appropriation of like an implicitly. I feel like I use that word a lot, implicitly.
good word.
It's like an appropriation of a kind of progressive technocratic view of things.
Yeah.
Just like, well, if you could get all the facts right, and the people who are like neutral and
Yeah.
and dispassionate,
Right.
then we could get stuff done. It's
That's
the
not true
problem.
though.
It's
Yeah.
not
That makes
true
you
at
the
all.
referee. The referee doesn't even play the
Yeah,
game. The referee is just there. Right. If you want to win, you
right,
can be the referee. Like
right.
so
So it's like this progressive technocratic expertise
it is very
kind of
yeah.
view of things.
Right.
And another thing is just like also that feelings are way more important than facts
Thank
most of
you.
the time.
Yes.
Like,
I work in marketing. I can assure you there's like no one's making fact-based slogans. Feelings sell. Feelings get
yeah,
things across. Crowds don't think in facts, they think in feelings.
but also feelings are, I would say, in some important way, more true than
Yeah, yeah.
facts. I mean, it's like, so an example like Rousseau uses is, he talks about, he has this essay called, I think, like On Truth and Lying
Sure.
in an Extra Moral Sense or something.
Mhm.
That might be somebody else actually, but he has something about this, like on lying or on truth and lying.
Okay.
And he talks about like, just trivial facts like, what color is the sand on the bottom of the ocean or whatever. It's like, what is more needful to you to like know that, or to like have your feelings correct? Like have
Sure.
your passions aligned with like what they should be or not.
Right.
Right. And so I'm not going so far as to say like,
Sounds like
like,
you endorse Rousseau on everything he believes and that
that's
he's your
right.
favorite.
No,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love Rousseau. Rousseau's
Yeah.
great, but
Yeah.
I'm not going so far as to, I don't feel like maybe it's a Babylon be like mockery of the Onion or like of Snopes, but like, like factually incorrect but morally true.
Right.
But there are things like that.
Sure.
That's like the facts are kind of insignificant, right? I mean, it's like a lot of this fact checking stuff will sometimes be like, if somebody said like, like every single president, like I remember one of them was like every single Republican president, like since like, Eisenhower has been impeached, and like Snopes will be like mostly false, like
Yeah.
because only 5 out of 6.
Yeah.
It's like, is that mostly?
Yeah.
It's like you really can't have a fact. I mean, you could say like this, that's not literally true if one of the 6 hasn't, but so many claims are not subject to fact checking.
Right.
But they're just not of that order of thing. Like if I tell you like the American regime is dedicated to equality,
Sure.
and fundamentally dedicated. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? Like, yeah, I can
Right.
look to the Declaration and say,
Right.
like, all men are created equal, blah blah blah. But like, is that the foundational document? Like, you have to make a claim about this. You have to make an argument about this, and it's at some level you have to make a judgment,
Right. Well, that's the
based
thing
on
about
other things.
facts
It's
have no
not a
judgment.
fact.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's like I feel this way about like immigration. I'm very agnostic on immigration. I don't really have strong feelings about it. And it's
Oh, you
like,
should though.
I mean, I see like you can, I get it. Like it's just not for whatever reason, it just doesn't. I'm not passionate about it. But like,
Well, can I tell a story about this? But after you finish.
sure. Well, I guess my point is like the fact of immigration is that it puts downward pressure on low skill wages. Like if you want to, like that is a fact, right? It increases the supply of low skill workers. Mm-hmm. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? What do we want to do about it? None of those questions have to do with facts. It's like,
yeah, I agree with you.
So that I guess that's kind of my thing.
I agree with you. And this is a prudential question that the American people, as the sovereign technically of the nation, through their elected representatives, like need to decide. But like the left, but increasingly just like the left and the right, just act like this is not something that you can even ask questions about.
Sure.
Right. But they don't even have any principle to apply in the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not like there's some, like everyone knows that this is a principle of prudence, like how many people to admit, what people of what kind, from what countries. Right. Yeah. But nobody is even willing to even discuss what the considerations would be. Like that's how diseased we are politically and intellectually as a country, that we can't even like have that conversation. But people have attempted. So I want to tell the story about like I was at this I did this Adam Smith fellowship with the Mercatus Center, which is at George Mason. So talking about libertarian economics.
Right. It's very libertarian over there. Yeah. But Austrian economics.
Yeah, and you'd think like, oh, these people are conservatives. Like, they're not conservative. Like,
questionable.
They're not conservative.
No,
like I remember,
people, which
not even close. Like there are a couple of conservatives that I met.
Yeah.
But I remember like it was like an informal conversation. It wasn't one of the seminars, but people were talking about immigration, and they're like, basically their position was like everyone at the table. Like I was the only one who even, differed from this. And the argument was like, what right does anyone have to restrict anyone's freedom of movement? It's like, you don't understand what a nation is. Like, you don't understand what defines a nation. Like somebody like Trump says, just like very clearly, like, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country.
That's fair. Yeah.
And it's like anything else that follows from that, like any other policy that he prescribes, any way he talks, some of them I assume are good people, like any of that other stuff, like you can talk about, but like you can't deny that that's true. And the reason, and people hear that and are like, yes, he at least is willing to say that. Is anyone else willing to say that?
Yeah. No, I agree. That's partially why I'm agnostic. I've always just been like, we're a country. We have the right to defend our border. Like it's implicit. Like it's part like. If you don't, what are you? You're just a throwaway. Like, so, to me, it's always
right. Well, I mean, just like to envision it from this like sort of libertarian view, which I don't think is really authentically libertarian, but like somehow that like you're just deciding and drawing lines for the whole nation. I mean, like I will take any kind of like Burkean, Kirkian, like crunchy historicist, like whatever over that.
Right. Well, the thing is that's they're like. A lot of libertarianism is based on anarchy, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't appreciate the nation state. Like it's like we don't even need it. We could just have local principalities. You can just travel. Like they don't necessarily believe in a social contract, which I'm partial to. But it's like you should be able to pick where you want to live, so you can pick what laws you want to live under, which is nice. But it's also semi-utopian, and not just utopian for a country, but utopian for the world.
It's just like the drop-down menu, like philosophy of how politics works.
Yes, it's not like it's fun to play around with those kind of games, but it's not really pragmatic. And
I was a libertarian too at one point.
Yeah, it's fun to be a libertarian. Mm-hmm. It's great. You get to outrage people.
I ran the mock campaign in my high school for Harry Browne.
Wow, Harry Browne's actually a decent libertarian, like good dude.
Oh yeah, I don't even know that anymore. I haven't kept up.
Yeah,
I haven't kept up on my Harry Browne studies.
Yeah, it's been my experience that libertarians come in like two flavors. Just absolute like hedonist, nihilist, scum of the earth. I just want to do anything I want, people, and then there's just kind of normal folks who just hate the government. I don't know, and they tend to be more conservative, but. Reason and a lot of the think tank ones like to hire the scum of the earth ones is my take. All right, so I want to get back to Strauss and all the jazz around Strauss.
Sure.
Because Strauss is kind of this, to me, he's still this figure that's out there. I've always overheard him like referred to as like the Straussians, right? It seems like he's got more of a role in academia, right? Like he just seems very in the shadows. So I guess my question is like, what role does he play for like conservative academia? Are all conservatives who come out of academia Straussians?
Oh no.
No. Okay, tell me more. Where does Strauss fit in the academic world?
Well,
East Coast, West Coast divide. How does it zooming out further? Are Straussians?
So I mean, in the modern university,
sure,
things are divided into departments and disciplines, and one of those disciplines is political science.
Yeah,
and then that has subfields,
sure,
like comparative politics and international relations and blah blah blah. And one of them, which isn't really political science, which has like all of these assumptions that I was just talking about, is one of the subfields is political theory. And I'd say political theory is like, it's not equally, there's like 5 subfields of political science, but it's not 20%. It's probably like 5%. Okay. And then within those 5%, like probably the vast majority of political theory is like race, sex, gender stuff.
Sure.
And then there's like a tiny percentage of it, which is like political philosophy, which is like Straussians. Now, some university departments have like government or other things which the Straussians are in. But it's a very narrow group of academics. And then there's like Thomists in other departments, in other, I mean, if you talk about conservatives, like you have Thomists, like you have more libertarian free market economist guys, you know, now you'd say you'd have more sort of like free speech intellectual types who are more liberal leaning, who are, you know, nevertheless conservative because they're not, you know, woke.
Like who?
But, you know, like Jonathan, you know, Chait style heterodox academy, type, you know, which is more, you know, that includes lots of people who are really more liberal in inclination.
Sure.
They're not like, certainly not like morally conservative.
Sure. Like your formal liberal, like to me, I consider like Jordan Peterson one of those guys who, like 25 years ago would have been like a Clinton Democrat, but because the left moved in this weird direction, he somehow became conservative. Like,
Right. And he thinks like psychology should be about like, I don't know, like making people's lives better instead of just like, you know, I almost said something I should. It's a family podcast.
Yeah, PG-13. Yeah.
But instead of, you know, just like prescribing people stuff and telling them like fantasies that make them feel better.
Right.
but yeah, you know, telling them like, hey, actually, like it's your fault and you need to do better. like that's just like anathema. So anyway, yeah, I would say that, I mean, yes, most conservatives in academia look down on and are suspicious of Straussians.
Interesting.
And most Straussians say they're not Straussians.
Go into that. Why is that happening? Why the suspicion towards Strauss? He doesn't seem that bad to me. I'm like, you're convincing me to become a Straussian. I don't know if you know this. Okay,
you should.
good.
I'm a Straussian. I'll say that outright.
Okay. Why the baggage? What's I guess this is kind of what I'm getting at, is
because
why
like they don't want to. They just want to think, because they're just like, well, I don't know what that is. Like Straussianism just means like reading books closely and like taking ideas and taking questions seriously. And it's not like a school. I don't believe in any dogma about it, you know. So they're like, so that's what they mean when they say I'm not a Straussian. Or like there are some narrow-minded Straussians who like only read these books that Strauss talked about and only talk about, you know, and I'm not one of those. So there's kind of like a straw man caricature of a Straussian, and they say, well, I'm not that.
Right.
Yeah, oh, interesting. Lots of people like that.
Interesting.
But if you are a student of Strauss and you have learned to ask those kinds of questions and read books in that way, you're a Straussian.
Interesting.
And so there's been a lot of influence, I would say, on cross-pollination influence, like for instance, like with like between like Thomists and Straussians. Right. Even though there's like strong disagreements there, like a place like University of Dallas, where I am, there are both. Although there's a lot more Thomists than Straussians,
right,
who are almost all gone at this point. But
what would be the disagreement between a Thomist and a Straussian? Would it just be religious, or would it be because I mean, like.
This is a hard question. I'm just very conscious of the fact that other people can answer this question better than I can.
Well, you don't have to go into detail, just generalities. Where are the conflict points?
It's a question of natural reason and natural law. And of whether there is well, first of all, I mean, reason versus revelation, which is one of the main, right? So one of the other things that Strauss is famous for, other than ancients and moderns, is reason and revelation, which is that there's a sort of insoluble divide between reason and revelation, and neither can refute the claims of the other.
Right. That seems Thomist to me, though. I don't.
Yeah. No. But I mean, yeah. Thomas says similar things, but he also says that like reason will lead to the same conclusions as revelation.
Right.
And revelation will tell you things that reason also tells you, but revelation will also tell you additional things beyond that. Right. You know, also that, you know, there's a revelation of our supernatural ends, which are not knowable through reason. You know, that kind of thing. The philosopher would say, who's the standard for Strauss, would say like, well, I can't know that. I mean, so Strauss says this, but like, you know, you get, you know, the sense that like, I mean, he's on the reason side,
Right.
like more
So
than
would it be fair
yeah.
to say he's kind of like this is actually I'm not gonna say this is fair. Is this unfair to say that he's kind of more of a uh, atheistic Thomism? Like Thomas falls on the side of faith most of the time, right? Like not most of the time. He's a saint. Yeah. Whereas
Well, it's hard to say he falls on the side of faith most of the time. He's not a monk in the desert. He's like
right,
wrote a treatise
that's
of
true. That's also
theology.
true.
I'd
Yeah,
say he
yeah,
falls on the side of reason most of the time,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I'd say that's fair. So would you say Strauss falls on the side like I don't know. He just
He's
discounts
certainly an
religion.
atheistic
Yeah,
philosopher. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But somebody who takes seriously the claims of religion much more than other
interesting.
philosophers.
Right.
But the disagreement about natural law is significant because
Yeah.
um, it's a question of whether you look to the human being and uh, and make conclusions about human nature based on that which you like, make conclusions which you think are um, and in terms of like what is good and what is wrong,
Right.
which are somewhat contingent
Mhm.
or which are sort of prudential conclusions based on natural precepts or something, or whether you think that there are sort of more fixed there's a more fixed precepts like in nature,
Sure.
natural law, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if you look, if you read somebody like Thomas closely, there's a lot of agreement between Thomas and, like, say, Aristotle.
Right. Oh,
But the
absolutely.
Straussian would be more inclined to say that most moral precepts are sort of like prudential conclusions
Right.
based on circumstances, whereas the Thomist would be more inclined to find sort of more fixed.
Right. The
Uh,
truth in it. Right.
yeah, I mean, I'm not doing a great job explaining this. I
Sure.
know
But
other people who would, but
but it
yeah,
does sound almost that's not quite Kantian. But like when there's something like it does seem to be an attempt to kind of
Neo-Kantian,
yeah, it's
Neo-Kantian.
neo-Kantian. Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means either. But yeah, it does
I mean,
seem like
Kant just seems like the furthest thing ever from Strauss to me. So I don't.
really.
Uh,
Well, go into that. All right. You're go up against the Wikipedia article. All right. Take it down. Why is Wikipedia wrong about Strauss? And that's what I'm going to name this video. 5 reasons why
uh,
Wikipedia is wrong about Strauss. It's going to be great.
well, I haven't even read the Wikipedia articles. So besides that, I didn't even
Perfect.
finish reading the first
Just
like
like a
paragraph.
BuzzFeed article. It's perfect. Just as
So,
research as a BuzzFeed article.
I mean, again, I don't know Kant super well, and I didn't think about this beforehand,
Sure.
but
Yeah, sorry, I'm asking you.
um,
Now we're getting deep into it.
derives principles of moral. I mean, Kant's thing is like trying to come up with
Mhm.
uh, a formal morality, because you're divorced. Like, you can't say that. Um, hmm, like, okay, you can't come up with moral conclusions based on experience, based on
Right. Like
nature.
rationalism,
Yeah,
is what it's called.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to come up with like a purely formal ethics,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Which, like, that's like the furthest thing ever from the Socratic tradition, which Strauss tries to recover, which is that you derive truth about human things from examining people's opinions and leading to and seeing where the contradictions in their thinking are, and so that you reveal the connections between human longing and and politics and religion and to cosmology, right? That
Right.
these things are all related. Like, you could never have a purely formal ethics that is cut off um, from particular circumstances. It's all about particular
Right.
circumstances.
You can't have an ethics apart from to me, it's like human sense or human experience, right? That's kind of where I,
Mhm.
as the laity to all this, view it. Because I would argue, Descartes kind of cuts off the whole. You can't trust the senses, although Plato kind of does that too. Anyways, Okay, so I guess yeah, I view Kant as taking like rationalism and romanticism and like scrunching them together and coming up with an even worse monster. Uh,
Okay.
Again, I'm just a guy, so that's how I view it. But that's it. So you would say that Strauss, to me, Strauss just seems like someone who's trying to recover the ancient tradition, who goes, all this modernity stuff, it's not going great for us. It's not good. So let's go back. Would you say that's kind of the legacy of Strauss?
Yeah, but it's not let's go back to remain there. It's
Sure.
let's recover what the ancient questions were so that we can revisit with that kind of freshness the present moment.
So like a great reset,
Sure.
a political philosophy reset is what you would say.
Uh, yeah, but I mean, there's a Straussian disdain for, which I share, for most of the academy, and it's what it takes seriously and thinks is important. Um, and
Oh, like what do you mean by that? Because like everyone hates academics these days. Like what do you mean by the academy? Like yeah,
not everyone hates academic. I mean, well, not
everyone
in the
who's
way that
smart.
Straussians do,
Well, okay, why do Straussians?
because the entire enterprise is predicated upon assumptions which they have no right to make and which are highly dubious. For instance, that there's a distinction between, uh, moral knowledge and empirical knowledge,
Sure.
scientific knowledge. That what we should be doing in the humanities is a kind of scientific fact gathering.
Right.
I mean, the entire research university is predicated. Um, there
But
there are
why?
whole departments which are just sort of like debased forms of like wannabe science, like a wannabe social science, like psychology, whereas like which would like literally means like study of or knowledge or account of the soul. Like they don't take seriously the idea of the soul, right? They would scoff at that, like they're
Right.
completely ignorant of the tradition, and it's all just it's a kind of well, it's either kind of like phenomenological study or it's
Right.
empirical study.
I was about to say it's almost
Uh,
pure empiricism and an almost scientism applied to the
mhm.
humanities.
Yeah, but the
Does that
same applies in like economics. The same applies in
right?
politics. I mean,
Yeah.
like you have whole journals in political science which are just basically useless. I mean, they're saying nothing interesting.
Right.
Uh, like, and they're and the same is true in economics as well.
Oh yeah.
And so then all of these things are divorced from uh, the whole, from any kind of like whole understanding of like
Sure.
what it means to, right? They don't even think like it's possible to say anything meaningful about those questions,
Right.
right? So the enterprise is predicated upon a separation in the human things from like the material things, which
Right.
is not defensible.
Right. So how does Strauss then justify? Because I do think when you put in that like he is an atheist, he is kind of this philosopher. How like without God, how does he justify like not just focusing on like the facts or the science or the rationalism or the material? How does he bring in the metaphysical? Like how does he kind of justify that aspect of it?
Well, nothing is more important than our beliefs about the divine,
Sure.
right? I mean, these are things that exist, right? That we have.
Oh yeah.
Like you just look at human beings and what they care about and how they
Sure.
talk,
Right.
and they care about that. So how are you just going to ignore that as an aspect of existence, an aspect of things that
Sure.
you should take seriously? Um,
Right. I mean, I think it's very fair to
so
say that
right,
human beings, like we, it's almost cliche to say now, like we all have that like God instinct. The left is religious about their
right,
stuff.
right,
My
sure, yeah.
favorite, yeah, my favorite
But
is
to
like
be an atheist doesn't mean you deny that
right,
religion exists.
right. But that
And
seems
so
to
if
be
that's a
the
phenomenon, like
yeah.
what is your like, are you just going to have some like puerile explanation?
But
Like
then
where
does
it's
that
like, oh,
make
people are stupid, they'll believe anything. But if
does,
only we could make them smart. Like that's what the Enlightenment is. Like the
right?
Enlightenment is like literally like, like turning the light on into the dark,
Yeah,
right? I mean, it's like it's a way of contrasting itself with the
right.
Dark Ages, right?
But then
Um,
at that point, doesn't that just make religion useful?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's how a Straussian
Okay, that's
would be.
interesting.
That's how you could castigate a Straussian from a
Right.
Thomist view or something.
That seems like a great way to. Yeah, that's where I would disagree with the Strauss. I'd say religion is not.
Sure.
It's more than just useful. Although I would agree it is useful.
Well, it's not just useful. It's like okay. So something that would distinguish maybe a Straussian from other kinds of academic conservatives would be that Straussians tend to think that there are sort of different human types.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that what something can be best for one human type that's not best for another human type, right? And so, of course, Straussians all think like, well, we're the best human type, we're the elite
I was
human
about to say,
type,
what are the human types?
and we don't need religion, but they do. Those lower types
right?
do.
Is it proletariat? Which human type is he? Bourgeois? Like, like once you're starting to get into human types, if they were getting to class theory, like we're getting.
Yeah, but no, it's not like Marxist class. That's I mean, so you're saying that so Marx says like the essential there's well, I don't want to get into Marx.
I
But
don't want to get into Marx either. I'm just saying, like, how does he like? Does he have a breakdown of human types, or is he just
well, just like
throw
the
it out there?
classical distinctions between like people who love wisdom, people who love
Sure.
honor, and people
Okay.
who love pleasure. Like that's the tripartite
Right.
distinction you see everywhere. And there's something rooted in nature about that. The more, and not just in nature, but in necessity. So it might be the case that, what do I mean by that distinction? I mean, it might be the case that everyone, it's unlikely, but it might be the case that everyone is capable of living the best life. But like human conditions do not permit that.
Right.
And so you're going to need some people who are, iron and bronze sold
Right.
jobs, like who are doing the things which are not going to they're not going to permit the a leisured
Sure.
life and like a noble life in terms of participating in rule, right? So then there's a distinction between those who care about honor and the noble, like it was just, and then like a tiny ground of people who really like love wisdom most of all.
Sure. It's very that's Aristotle for the most part, right?
Yeah, right. So
Right.
like so these are different human types, and it's not just
Right.
that like we need different people to do these different jobs. It's that this is maybe in some way rooted in nature. Like nature actually distinguishes between these kinds of people, although maybe not in a hard and fast way. Part of the promise of modernity is like, well, through and Marx talks about this too, is that through progress, through technological progress, like we will be able to raise everyone to that
right.
level. The problem is like what happens. What happens is that you get all this material prosperity, all this technological progress, and what happens is people use their time. They live in the pod and eat the bugs and watch the porn.
They become efficient. They optimize for efficiency. That's
right, but they're not spending the rest of their time like philosophizing and fishing and like in this noble leisure that Marx describes.
Right.
Because there's something, it's something essential that you have these distinctions in human beings, which means that so to get back to the question of
where does Strauss say that comes from?
Religion, yeah.
Is that biological? Is that because to me, that becomes religion. Like you're like there's you can't separate that from religion. But I've heard like evolutionary biologists, I think Brett Weinstein, make the argument that this need is evolutionary, right? It's just part of our genes. It's how we transmitted knowledge. It's part of how we grew, right? They make the purely functional, pragmatic case. Where does Strauss sit in that kind of difference?
I'm not sure what you're asking. You're saying in terms of where the differences come from between people?
I guess my question is like,
yeah.
Does he say it's purely material? Like this just happens and we should just accept it as the way life is and build our philosophies around it? Or I guess
I think it's I don't know if there is a material cause, it would or an evolutionary biological cause, that would be largely irrelevant, although I won't say entirely irrelevant.
Sure.
But it's just simply something that we observe, and
it's a feature of humanity.
There is, that there is heterogeneity,
mm-hmm.
and if you or human biodiversity. Now,
Very good.
heterogeneity, and if you just have eyes and observe things, like you recognize that there is this heterogeneity, and there's a heterogeneity like not just in peoples but in like ideas and in things.
Sure.
Like that there everything is not simply all one thing, which is not qualitatively differentiated, like a kind of homogeneous thing, which is
Sure.
what modernity largely believes. Like if everything is matter and motion, then there's somewhat arbitrary distinctions that you have to make between human beings and another kind of animal, for instance.
Right.
But we recognize, like just through common sense, we recognize like a human being is one thing,
right,
and an animal is another thing, and they're qualitatively different. Now amongst human beings, you could say that there's like a philosopher is one thing, and like
a ditch digger is another.
Right. And so this used to be something that people recognize. I mean, like Washington, right? He says in his farewell address, he says, whatever philosophic notions might have a sway with minds of a peculiar bent or whatever, there's basically, he says there's never going to be some kind of like rationalistic theistic religion or you're never going to have like this rational society ruled by like the lights or whatever they call themselves. Most people need something like need to have some account of the meaning of things, the meaning of their life, which is easy, ready to hand, and it's not just ready to hand, but like is like tactile and realized in real way, like in tangible ways, like every day,
right?
For their like lives to be healthy and for them to be happy. Sure. Like as Rousseau says, like you need something that promotes morality in this sort of like common sense way, and also you need some kind of myth about what happens when you get away with it. When you do the bad thing and get away with it, you don't actually get away with it. Like you need to understand that.
Right. So I was about to say, you brought up myth. Right. I feel like I often hear the word like American myth thrown around a lot when it comes to this sort of thing. Is that kind of a Straussian idea that we need that culture, that myth, that American, almost like an American exceptionalism, right? Like it seems like that's kind of built in a little bit with what he thinks is important for the country, or what will be important for the masses of the country.
Yeah, well, this is somewhat of a separate question than that of religion simply, sure. Although I mean not unrelated, but
it's a little more zoomed out. I'd say it's a little more. Yeah, like religion is a part of the culture, right? Judeo-Christian, that kind of whole deal.
Right, but you're asking about the myth, like the myth of America, or so how we understand America, not how we understand God necessarily.
Yes, but I guess I'm kind of taking it more towards like the political. All right, what is kind of zooming out for the nation for that kind of stuff? What is his role in that sense? Because obviously, a religion would be a portion of that. Like you would want a strong religious. It seems to me that Strauss would argue you'd want a good religious tradition, culture, something like that, for the people in order to prosper. Rich, I think that's a lot of the founders have a similar feel about that, right? We made a country that is good as long as the people are good, right? I'm paraphrasing one of them. So it seems like Strauss would argue that that's important. So is it then, therefore, would Strauss argue that it's vital that America, and this is, I'm on a little bit of a propaganda kick, should propagandize its people? Like, should the Pledge of Allegiance be said in order to keep this myth going? Is patriotism, like, it seems like you could, I'm talking myself into I'm realizing as I'm saying this that I'm almost making a case for a nationalism or an American exceptionalism. How would Strauss?
Well, I mean, he would say something like any healthy nation is going to like articulate its principles and say that it is good. Like he says that somewhere.
That's interesting. Our country doesn't do that these days.
Yeah, our country doesn't do that, which means it's deeply unhealthy.
Right.
But I mean, it doesn't mean you have to go so far as to something as jingoistic as the Pledge of Allegiance, which was invented very lately,
Yeah.
and has somewhat un-American influences in it.
Right. Was that Dewey and the Prussian school? Was that where that came from?
I actually don't know.
It strikes
but
me
it's late. It seems like I think it's like late 19th century or early 20th century. I mean, it's not like something that's from the very beginning. I mean, no other country has a Pledge of Allegiance. So it's strange.
It's an
strange thing to do.
We teach our children to say an oath to a flag, anyways.
Yeah. And then in Texas, it's like incomprehensible. It's like this version of it like changes like voice like several times like in a very short time, but it's like based on the U.S. pledge. It's something like honor the Texas flag. So it's like second person like imperative, like you honor the Texas flag, and then it says I pledge allegiance to you, Texas. It switches to first person, and then it's like I don't know how it goes after that, but
it sounds like someone just kind of threw it together and not
very poorly.
Great, not some great poet. Yeah.
So I taught at a Texas school, and we had to say the pledges every morning, both the U.S. pledge and the Texas pledge.
Oh, good.
I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, indivisible, one and indivisible, something like that.
Oh, that's wild.
It's funny that they throw in indivisible, because actually in the original Texas Constitution, it contains a provision that it can be divided into 5 different states.
Yeah.
We've clarified that with the pledge, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in terms of what would be natural and healthy and normal, every nation should defend itself. And like just insofar as like people aren't going to, like, you shouldn't, and it would be unreasonable to expect like the normal average American to like understand all of the philosophic principles and all of the complexities. Like, yes, you should teach a basic, somewhat superficial view of what the country is about, right? I mean, but America is, the problem with that is like America is somewhat of a creedal nation. Mm-hmm. And it's rooted in a kind of a principle in a way that no other nation is, which is, other nations have these sort of like deep roots in language, and
like
which America doesn't have.
You couldn't pull off a blood and soil speech in the United States. Nobody's blood is of this soil. Like we all came here. Like not nobody's, very few people. So,
well, we came here in recent recorded history. That's a significant thing. Everybody came from somewhere else, but including the native inhabitants of America who are not native. There's no such thing as autochthony. People are not born from the earth. Everyone is a conqueror and a colonist. But so it's because it was in recent memory. So that's why it's. I think that's part of the reason why we have this sort of idea of American exceptionalism too. It's because we have a chip on our shoulder about being inferior to these established European nations. And so that's connected, I think, to this idea of God's providence allowing for us to come to this mostly uninhabited landmass, which is so favorable to us. And at this time when certain principles and certain religion would be dominant. I mean, I don't know how that's connected to Strauss at all, but
well, I guess it seems like to me that Strauss he finds the use in that, where I think a lot of it seems like a lot of schools of philosophy, or a lot of just like politics in general, we've lost this whole like America is good, or like even just having an opinion on America, right? Like. Mm-hmm. Trump said, "Make America great again," which is an interesting statement, but it is one of those where it's like, it's okay to say that, right? Like it seems like that's for whatever in our current time, an odd like opinion to have on the country is that it can be great. It can be better than other countries. It can't just be one of many countries. It should be the best country, right? Like that's And it seems to me
part
like
of the problem with it.
Would agree with that, or you could find in Strauss a rationalization to have that kind of a feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, insofar as he's a critic of the Enlightenment, he would disagree with the Enlightenment view that the rational understanding of things should be introduced to everybody. I mean, that's what the Enlightenment is.
Right.
It's a kind of demystification. But the problem is that when you open that up to everybody, you just lead to kind of a different kind of cartoonish understanding of things, which is unhealthy. So, for instance, like the sophisticated view, we want everyone to have the sophisticated view. The sophisticated view is like America's just another, it's arbitrary what country we're born in.
Right.
And it's like Obama said, I believe in American exceptionalism the same way I believe in South African exceptionalism and German exceptionalism and Iraqi exceptionalism. It's like, or people say like, make America great again. America was always great.
Right.
But it's still got a long way, so like a sort of simple, unsophisticated patriotism, which is the natural and normal inclination of a person to be attached to their country. And those kinds of associations which people have, which are not voluntary, right? They're, like your family and your community and your nation. Those are the kinds of attachments from which we are to be divided, and we're supposed, so that we are individuals who have a kind of client relationship with an administrative government.
Right.
We're just a kind of administrative district for the eventual, UN. Right. Global homogenous state.
Right.
I mean, your sci-fi depictions of Earth
for the
future,
Federation.
It's always a united federation of UN, because that's where history is going. Right. So anybody who has this kind of if you read like a history book, it's like nationalism, and it's always like an agent, like it's doing something, like nationalism reared its ugly head.
Right.
Or like,
even though it's kind of an innate feature of human beings, is to root for who you are and where you're from, your tribe, your family, your country, like every baseball team. Like it's it's I root for the Tigers because I grew up near Detroit. Like that's nationalism. I guess it's cityism or whatever you want to call it, but it's that same instinct.
Right. Whereas philosophy is inherently cosmopolitan. Right. It's superior to and beyond the polis or the city.
Oh yeah.
So somebody like Strauss is a cosmopolitan. Like inherently is cosmopolitan.
Right.
So he's not loyal to, no philosopher is going to be loyal to their nation in the same way. So for a philosopher or a philosophic movement to say, I recognize that like my cosmopolitanism is not the natural, normal, and healthy condition for a human being, like that's somewhat unusual. And and what's also even more unusual and unhealthy is the situation that we're in now, which is to say, to try to take that cosmopolitanism of philosophy that is inherent to philosophy and make this the view for everybody.
Right.
That's the Enlightenment.
Yes.
Right? Even though the Enlightenment, of course, is attached to modern nationalism.
Sure. I mean, it spins off in a bunch of different directions, but that's certainly a way to take it. Is this sort of Alex Jones globalists are taking over, right? Like that seems to be something that
the global, like folks, like how does he sound like? He's like I'm so angry right now. These globalists.
Nailed it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Something like that.
Turning the frogs gay. Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. That's interesting.
I will not. Sorry. I will not surrender. It will not.
Yeah, he really has it like hemorrhoid to him. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great. Okay. That was good. I'm feeling
I will
better.
not live in the pod.
He doesn't eat bugs either. I will not eat bugs.
I will not eat bugs.
Yeah.
I will eat meat.
Yeah.
Like a human being, a man.
Yeah.
I'm a man. Yeah.
Good.
I've only seen like one Alex Jones clip.
I've only seen clips. Yeah, I've never watched the show. But whatever. The GIFs are good, so I'm gonna take them. All right.
I just want the audience to know, if in case anyone is watching or still watching at this point, that I'm not. I do not regularly watch Alex Jones. Although I did take a picture of an Alex Jones like reporter.
Okay.
In Austin.
Yeah. Well, he's based out of
where he's based out of Austin. And at one time I was in my house, and there was all this commotion outside, and so I walked to the street near near my street, the main street, and like there were all these people gathered with signs and stuff, and it was like, oh, President Trump is driving by in his like motorcade.
Oh,
And so it was like right by my house, and it was going to like the national, like the state, like storm center or something for like there was a hurricane,
okay.
flooding and stuff.
Mhm.
And so there were all these people there to like protest him and stuff. And then there was a Alex Jones reporter.
Nice.
So I got a picture with him. So that's on like the Google servers somewhere.
Congratulations. You're
ready to.
When they find that one. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad you brought up Alex Jones, because this is how I want to end the interview, if we're going to call it the conversation. It's more of a conversation. It's a new show. I'm trying to find a good way to end these, and I think I'm going to end it with asking people, what is
watch Alex Jones?
Yes,
and make sure you hit that like button
on his channel. Yeah. No, it's what conspiracy theory do you want to be true?
Ooh,
not which one's your favorite, but which one, because every conspiracy theory says something about the world we live in, and like they're just implications. So which one do you want to be true? Because the implications of it would just be bonkers.
Do I want to be true? Wow. I wish I had time to think about this.
No, see, I don't want to give you time, because then you can think of like a safe answer. I want the raw answer.
What do I want to be? What conspiracy theory do I want to be true? I want to believe, and my use of that phrase should be very telling.
Yeah, I know you're going with this. Aliens, right? X-Files?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, let's say, like, can you imagine that, like, there's just been this continuity of just like, yeah, we all agree. Like, what is the thing that they're seeing that they're like, well, of course, we're not going to tell anybody about this. Of course, like, nobody's leaked it. Like, it's never been.
Sure.
Like,
yeah, the implication is the government is incredibly, like competent in keeping this particular secret. Yeah.
Right. Like, but just like, there's something about it. It's not just like, there's aliens and they visited us before. It's like, oh no, people cannot know this.
Yeah.
Like, even just like,
right.
Don John himself is just like, I'm not going to say anything about this.
That means there's a reason why we can't know about them. There's something wrong. There is something where if the masses know, the world becomes worse, right?
Like it's some Planet of the Apes like plot twist where it's like we actually like aliens are actually like a super evolved form of human beings who went back in time and are now like they're trapped in a time loop or something.
Sure.
And they're visiting us as like they're trying to get back.
Right.
And if we were to like do anything to try to
we would end the world or something. Yes.
Yeah,
if we found out about it, then okay. I like that. That's a good answer. That's a really good answer. I appreciate that one. Mine is flat Earth. Because that would just be hilarious. Like what a total upend on like physics and everything we know. Plus then be an ice wall. That'd be kind of cool.
It's all discs.
Yeah. What's that?
The universe is just like a series of discs.
Yeah, it's Terry Pratchett, right? The Discworld, we're just a disc on top of an elephant or turtle. Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, thank you for coming on here and explaining Strauss to me and talking through conservatism. I appreciate it. Do you have anything to plug? I asked you if you wrote a book, and you said you don't have a book. Do you have a blog?
I don't have anything right now. No, I'm working on a book on I'm working on a book on classical pedagogy.
Okay.
And applying classical principles to pedagogy. Pedagogy is like a thing which is like an invention of modern, pseudoscience.
Sure.
So, but there are a lot of useful things in it, and so, but they're not very classical or liberal. So I'm trying to apply them to that. But I've written some articles on the American mind recently. I have one coming out that's a defense of the 1776 project. Okay, great. People can look out for that. When's the book going to come out? A year from now? 2 years from now? A year from now. All right, so a year from now. A year and a half, yeah. All 80 people that watch this, a year from now, you watch out for that book, and you go buy it. All 80 of you. All right? It's going to be great. Good. Awesome. Thank you for coming on. Wow. Yeah. No problem. It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.